Доброго дня, друзі! Продовжуємо наші традиційні брифінги.
Hello friends, we continue our briefings aimed at exposing fakes and propaganda of the aggressor state. They created a new fake that Ukraine is allegedly involved in plans to assassinate Russian propagandist Vladimir Solovyov. Putin even made such a statement in person, and in order to support this narrative, they started distributing various fake videos. But Ukraine has nothing to do with these plans, and the State Security Service of Ukraine strongly denies any intention to clean up Solovyov. In our opinion, he will end badly himself because of his propaganda activities and lies. But this alleged attempt, as presented by the Russian media, has all the hallmarks of a typical Russian model of behavior. They create a so-called mirror. As soon as Russia is accused of something, they immediately start blaming others for it. As soon as the news of this attempt appeared, Russian politicians immediately entered the propaganda arena. In particular, the Speaker of the State Duma of Russia, Volodin, stated that after everything that happened, and nothing happened, Ukraine has become a terrorist state. This indicates a painful reaction in the Russian Federation to Ukraine's actions to recognize Russia itself as a terrorist state. Let me remind you that in terms of strengthening sanctions, which is currently being developed by the Yermak-Makfol group, there is one point in the list that recognizes Russia as a state that supports terrorism. Accordingly, Volodin's statement is simply a reaction to our activity in this direction. Also very revealing is the reaction of another person, a regular Russian propaganda and ideologist of the war against Ukraine, Timofey Sergeytsev. He is a political technologist who once worked even with Ukrainian clients, and in recent years has devoted himself to writing very long texts that would justify Russia's war against Ukraine. What Sergeytsev said: it turns out that this assassination attempt on the Solovyov, which did not take place and in which Ukraine is not involved, actually has signs of anti-Semitism. He said the hatred directed at Solovyov in reality turns out to be directed at the Russian mass audience, public in nature, and since Solovyov also regularly emphasizes his Jewish identity, the hatred of Solovyov undoubtedly carries the charge of militant anti-Semitism. It is even difficult to comment on this. Ukraine is a multicultural nation. There is no persecution on any grounds. Moreover, if anyone is to be accused of persecution, it is the Russians themselves who kill the Ukrainians. And the history of anti-Semitism is not the first time that Russian propagandists have tried to include Ukraine in this context. Just remember how the first weeks of the Russian war they launched a fake that the Jewish community in Berdychiv was fleeing not because of the intentions of Russia, which wants to occupy those territories, but because they are pursued by Ukrainian nationalists. After that, the head of the Jewish community of Berdychiv and the chief Rabbi spoke out with a refutation. Of course, this is a lie. The Ukrainian state has nothing to do with both the attempt on Solovyov and anti-Semitism. Solovyov should deal with his special services, because with his company and criticism of the Russian authorities for the fact that they attack Ukraine so little, it seems that he may soon become a target for them. Another very revealing moment. The day before, I already talked about how the terrorist organization of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic boasts that they hung a red flag over the seemingly liberated but in fact destroyed village of Novotoshkivske. Then the Russian propagandists demonstrated the video left from the village. Nothing left, just ruins. But now a red flag is hanging there, which has nothing to do with the victory of 1945, but Russia's attempt to privatize this history in its favor, leaving ruins behind. In order to somehow spread its propaganda, Russia starts the work of its full-time propagandist, the so-called German propagandist Thomas Röper, into the arena. This is not the first time he has made statements that Russia needs. Moreover, this is done on the propaganda Russian state TV channel Russia Today. This time he speaks with the words that it seems that Russian troops do not commit any crimes on the territory of Ukraine. I asked people about the behavior of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers and was surprised that only Ukrainians were looting, especially before their retreat, while Russians were being polite, trying to help and even sharing medicines when possible. It is ridiculous to read and listen to all this, but that's not just what Mr. Röper has done before. In particular, he previously denied Russian involvement in the shooting down of the Malaysian Boeing MH17, as well as the poisoning of the Skripals in Britain. Now he denies the Russian army's crimes on Ukrainian territory. There is nothing surprising in this. There are dozens of such propagandists in Russia, occasionally appearing on their TV channels, justifying the criminal actions of the aggressor state. And finally, from the section of curiosities, Russians do not have enough arguments to present themselves in a positive light, so they turn to such totally amusing characters. For example, on the Russian state-run media outlet RIA Novosti, with an audience of millions, they publish a photo and the following text with all seriousness possible. A resident from Sri Lanka voices his support for Russia. How do they prove it? With a picture of a tuk-tuk driver carrying a portrait of the Russian president in his wallet? Well, at this pace, not only tuk-tuk drivers, perhaps the cleaners will soon be supporting Putin in Sri Lanka as well. This only points to the lack of arguments on the Russian side, and the fact that to manipulate general opinion they attract even completely helpless characters. Remember how they used to show a homeless man who was dressed up in the uniform of a Ukrainian nationalist and told Kadyrov on camera how he was massacring people in Mariupol, but the locals recognized him as just a very poor man who had been sitting under a church for years begging for money, and now a tuk-tuk driver. Well, friends, there will still be a lot of such propaganda, and we need to keep a critical mind and believe in the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian political leadership and the Ukrainian media. Everything will be fine.